I'm going to be showing you how I made this fondant Spider-Man figure. Come join me. I'm starting off with 4 colors of fondant. I have blue, red, white, and black. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm making a rectangle of blue fondant, and I'm just kind of squaring off the sides of it and the top of it, and then I'm letting the bottom a little bit more relaxed and rounded. After I have that kind of formed, I'm pulling off some red and I'm going to create the head for our Spider-Man topper. Adding a little bit of Tylose powder here because I want this to dry more firm, hold its shape. I'm going to move on. I'm adding a little bit of powdered sugar here just to keep it from sticking to the table. And I'm going to start now to work on his arms and legs. So I'm just making a long cylinder of some blue fondant, adding some Tylose powder. I'm just working that in so that I can make that long cylinder of blue fondant. I'm rolling that out. I'm kind of squaring off the ends of that just so that it's all one thickness. I'm measuring here so I can cut it about halfway. So these are going to be his legs. Obviously these are still too long, but I'm just kind of getting a sense of how thick they are and if that works with the size of his body. Now I'm moving on to making the arms. Again, one long piece of fondant that I'll cut down to 2 arms. I'm evening them up to make sure they're the same length. And now I'm beginning to work on his boots. So I'm rolling out some red fondant and I'm going to cut some strips of that fondant. So now I'm going to kind of flatten out the bottom of his leg, and I'm going to wrap that fondant around the very bottom as if it's the sock of his leg or the top of his boot. Using a little bit of water to hold that in place. And now that red piece will function as the top of his boot. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other leg. Here I'm just cleaning up the top of his boot. And now I'm making sure that his legs are the same length. So here I am working on the soles and the front part of his boot, which will be where his toes would be. So I'm making one longer piece of fondant, cutting it in half, so each one of them will be for one of the boots. Just going to sit that on top, and on top of that piece I just cut, and that will be his boots. Rounding that off a little bit so that they don't look out of place, so it actually looks like the bottom of a boot. Again, cleaning up the top of that boot. So I'm cutting off some of that bottom part of his leg that is sticking out past what is the top of his boot, so that the sole of the boot sits directly on the top of his boot that's in place already. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to this and use that to stick that on. So there you have it. That's what his boot looks like. There we go. We have his legs together. I'm just putting a little bit of powdered sugar so that my character's legs don't stick to this plate. I'm putting them aside, and I'm now looking at his torso. I'm going to cut each of those legs to the right length. You'll notice that I cut a little bit of a triangle out of the torso, and I'm doing the same thing at his legs so that I can attach them at an angle. And that's what that looks like. So I'm going back to those pieces that I'm using for arms and cutting those down so that they're more appropriate length, so that they fit the size and shape of his current body. I'm using my tools to bend where will be his elbow. And I'm also cutting at an angle so that I can attach this near his shoulders, so we can get that more natural shape of his body. I'm sorry, of his arm. Now I am using some red, and I'm creating little gloves or hands for him that will rest on his shoulders when this is, or on his hips when this is done. Using that tool to make the indentation near his thumb. Now that I have them kind of shaped, I'm going to cut them off so they're not quite as long. And I'm going to attach them to the arms using some water, the same way we did with the boots. Now I'm using some water, and I'm actually attaching his arm to his shoulder now. And attaching the glove to the other arm. And attaching the arm to the shoulder. Here I am just kind of shaping the legs so that you can see the difference between his knee and his thighs. Here I'm taking a piece of wire, and I'm pushing it in through the bottom of his foot up into his leg and into his torso to hold all of this in place. And this is food safe wire that to just to hold this all together. Again, shaping his knee and his thighs. And when I picked it up, I did notice that some of that wire was coming out the side, so I'm having to push that back in, which I'm doing right now. Using some of my tools to push that back in and cover up where that was coming out. So now I'm moving on to some of the more decorative parts of our topper, rolling out some red fondant, and I'm going to cut this down to really function as like the covering of his chest, where he has that red color in his outfit. So this, I'm just getting kind of a general shape, and now I'm more refining that shape of that piece on his outfit. And this is really to bring out the shape of his chest. And one thing I did mess up here is I thought initially that this piece went from head to down in his groin, realized later that it only goes down to his waist. So I do go back and I will cover up the take off the part that is covering his groin in red, and I'll cover that in blue to get rid of that error that I'm making right here as I'm pushing it in. So you'll notice I use my tools to push this bottom part of red into his groin. I will ultimately take that back off because that's not how his outfit really is. So I worked hard at getting that into the creases, only to realize that it shouldn't be there at all. Then I'm going to take some water and I'm going to secure that down onto his body. So now I'm moving forward with creating the band that goes around his waist in red. And then I'm going to put that to the side. Here's where I had taken that red part off of his groin. I'm making now just other pieces that will go along his outfit. Originally, I was going to use these strips to put them down his arms because part of his top is red on the arms, but I ended up going a different direction than doing these separately. So you'll see how I handled that in a second. So I'm standing this up, and ultimately I get a bigger piece of fondant that's rolled out, and I'm kind of draping that over his shoulders to use that then to wrap down over his arms, which I felt would be easier if I secured that in place with the other pieces that are already on, and then shaped them up the way that they should be shaped on his arms. So here I am, just kind of testing it out. I'm going to peel that red piece up, and I'm ultimately going to put this piece that I'm working with underneath that to hold it into place. Here I was really just kind of deciding how I was going to handle this. So as I mentioned, I'm peeling up that red piece, and I'm going to use that to secure the other pieces of fondant. This is going to be the back part that covers the top part of his body, similar to the way we did in the front. Here I'm just thinning that out some. Putting that onto his back, and I'll use some water to secure that down. I'm taking that down to his waist and securing that with some water on his, like at the top where his head will be. These are the pieces, this is the piece that will go down over his arms. So I'm securing that in place. Then I'm putting that back piece on using some water. Then I'm going to use that piece that I had peeled up and kind of seal those things in place. There you have it. You can see that I have these loose pieces coming down over his arms. I'm going to attach them to his arms and cut off the excess near his wrist, which I just did. And I'm just shaping that so that it covers the top part of his outfit on his arms. I'm cutting that down to the size of the length of his arm. And I'm using my tools to smooth out the edges of where that red is resting, just to clean up the way his arms will ultimately end up looking. Here is what he looks like after I'm finishing all of that process. Now it's time to add some of the decorative features onto this. And this is where I'm drawing the webs onto his feet, chest, and along his belt. So I'm doing this by drawing lines, and then I'm kind of drawing these like loops in between each one of the lines to connect them, the way a web is done. Here I am making his eyes. I'm using an icing tip, a piping tip, and I'm making them into kind of like a cat eye shape. And here I am trying it on his face to see if it's a good size. And I see it is, so I'm going to use some piping gel, and I'm attaching that to his face. And he's starting to come together here. And as an FYI, he is a baby version of Spider-Man. That's what the person wanted. Now moving forward with drawing the spider webs onto his face, which this video should have been prior to the one that we just watched. After I get this on, or after I get this drawn on, is when I add his eyes and stuff to the face, obviously. Now I'm going back to drawing those webs on his chest and on his belt. And on his gloves as well. Now these, here again, kind of shaping him to the way that I want his legs to look. And keep in mind, this is an edible marker that I'm using to draw onto him. Last thing I'm going to do as far as putting him together here is adding his head, but then I'm adding another piece of a wire here so that we can hold his head better into place. Which of course I will let the person know that this wire is in there and it's holding it in place. I'm going to use some piping gel and put that underneath his head to help hold that in along with that wire so it doesn't come off. Just putting that around the wire and on his shoulders so that we can hold them in place. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move forward drawing that spider on his chest. with our edible marker. Here I'm just cleaning up some of the bumps and stuff that are on his legs and groin so we can smooth that out a bit. And now drawing in our spider. That's what he looks like here. The last thing we need to do is add some black around each one of his eyeballs. And we did that by using an extruder, and I'm just draping that around each eye and securing it, kind of pressing it in with some of my fondant tools. And once we get both of these eyes wrapped with some black fondant, he is complete. I do hope that you are enjoying watching this video and that you will come back again and watch other content that I share. And with that, here is our final topper. Thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, share, and join again.